The silence in Julian Croft's penthouse was a living thing, a predator that stalked the cavernous rooms and clung to the velvet drapery. It was a silence woven from money, power, and a despair so profound it seemed to lower the temperature of the air. Clara Reyes, who had polished every marble surface and dusted every soulless sculpture in the tri-level apartment for the past 6 months, knew its every texture. She could distinguish the tense pre-board meeting silence from the brooding post-market crash silence. Tonight it was something new. It was the silence of an ending. From the service corridor, she could hear the low murmur of voices from the grand study. One was Julian's, a baritone usually sharp and decisive, now frayed and thin like a worn rope. The other belonged to Isabella Vance, his fiancée, a voice like honey laced with shards of glass. Clara had seen the way Isabella looked at the penthouse, not as a home, but as a kingdom she was about to inherit. She looked at Julian the same way. Clara's duties for the evening were done. Her mother, whose mounting medical bills were the reason Clara had abandoned her accounting degree to take this job, would be waiting for her call. But an unnerving stillness in Julian's voice held her captive. She pushed the service trolley, its wheels unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet, towards the kitchen, but her feet slowed near the study's partially open door. "It's over, Izzy," Julian's voice cracked. "He took it all. Marcus, he gutted me from the inside out." "Darling, don't be so dramatic," Isabella cooed, the sympathy in her tone as fake as the Picasso in the hallway. "It's a temporary setback. We'll fight him. We have the best lawyers money can buy. You're Julian Croft." "The lawyers can't fix this," he rasped. "The company is a shell. He leveraged everything against me, used my own digital signature. The board meeting tomorrow is a formality, a public execution. He even has my personal accounts frozen. He won." Clara pressed her back against the cool wall, her heart thumping. Marcus Thorne, Julian's partner and best friend. She'd seen him here dozens of times, laughing, clapping Julian on the back. A viper in a bespoke suit. "Well," Isabella's voice shifted, a subtle chill creeping in. "What does this mean for us? The wedding is in 2 months. The venue deposit is non-refundable." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. The deposit. That was her first thought, not the man whose entire world had just crumbled. There was a long pause, then the sound of a heavy crystal decanter being set down, followed by the clink of a small glass vial against its side. A strange, acrid scent, faintly medicinal, drifted into the corridor. It was a smell Clara recognized with a jolt of pure terror. It was similar to a cleaning solvent they kept locked away, a chemical so potent that a single drop on the skin required an immediate emergency call. "It means there is no us," Julian said, his voice eerie-aurally calm. "There is no wedding. There is nothing. Just one final drink to toast the end of Croft Enterprises, and the end of its fool of a founder." Isabella laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "Julian, stop it. You're scaring me." "What is that?" Clara didn't wait for the answer. A cold dread, colder than any winter night, seized her. She saw in her mind's eye her own father, his face pale and defeated after losing his small business, the empty bottle of pills on his nightstand. She had been too late then. A child, helpless. She would not be too late now. She burst through the door. The scene was a tableau of despair. Julian stood by the massive oak desk, his back to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the glittering, indifferent city. His face was a mask of grey, his eyes hollowed out. In his hand, he held a small, dark vial, uncapped and raised towards his lips. Isabella was a few feet away, her hand fluttering near her throat, her expression one of annoyance rather than genuine fear. She was watching her future inheritance about to self-destruct. "Mr. Croft, no!" Clara screamed. Julian didn't even flinch, his eyes fixed on some distant, terrible horizon. Isabella shot Clara a look of pure venom. "Get out, you stupid girl. This is a private conversation." But Clara wasn't looking at Isabella. She was looking at the vial, at the slight tremor in Julian's hand, at the finality in his posture. There was no time for words, no time for pleading. There was only time for action. She closed the distance in 3 long strides. Her mind, usually a whirlwind of numbers and worries about her mother, went completely blank. replaced by a single primal instinct. Stop him. She didn't reach for the vial. His grip would be too strong. She did the only thing she could think of, the only thing that would be shocking enough to break the spell. She drew her right arm back and punched him. It wasn't a graceful or powerful punch. It was clumsy, desperate. Her knuckles connected squarely with his jaw. The impact was jarring, a sickening thud that echoed in the silent room. Julian's head snapped to the side. His eyes, wide with shock, finally focused on her. The vial flew from his grasp, arcing through the air and shattering against the marble fireplace, its contents hissing as they ate into the polished stone. For a moment, there was only the sound of their ragged breathing. Julian touched his jaw, his expression one of utter disbelief. Then Isabella's voice, shrill and furious, tore through the silence. "You animal! You hit him! You assaulted him! I'll have you thrown in prison for the rest of your miserable life!" Isabella lunged at Clara, her perfectly manicured nails poised like claws. But Julian moved faster. He raised a hand, not to defend Clara, but to stop Isabella. As she reached him, his disbelief morphed into a flash of white-hot rage. A rage not directed at the woman who had just struck him, but at the one who had stood by and watched. He looked at Isabella, truly looked at her, and in that moment he saw everything. He saw the calculation in her eyes, the greed, the utter lack of empathy. He saw her weighing the cost of the venue deposit against the value of his life. "You," he whispered, his voice shaking with a terrible newfound clarity. "You just stood there." "Julian, darling, I was terrified." "I didn't know what to do," she pleaded, her voice suddenly syrupy sweet. "She knew what to do," he said, his gaze shifting to Clara, who stood frozen, her hand throbbing, her entire body trembling with adrenaline and fear. With a swift, shocking motion, Julian turned and slapped Isabella across the face. The sound was sharp, a crack of thunder in the confined space. Isabella stumbled back, a perfect red handprint blooming on her cheek, her eyes wide with outrage and disbelief. "Get out," Julian commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "What? You can't be serious. She hit you," Isabella shrieked. "She saved my life," he countered, his eyes never leaving Clara's. "You were planning the funeral. Get out of my house." He walked past the stunned Isabella, past the shattered glass and the corroded spot on the marble. He stopped directly in front of Clara, who flinched, expecting another blow. His eyes, no longer hollow, were filled with a chaotic storm of emotions. He reached into his pocket, his hand shaking, and pulled out not a weapon, not a phone, but a single heavy ring of keys. On it was a sleek black fob and several brass keys of varying sizes. Clara recognized it instantly. It was his personal set. The key to the penthouse, the private elevator, his wine cellar, his safe, the executive garage, the keys to his entire locked-down world. The keys he never let anyone, not even his security chief, touch. He pressed the cold metal into her trembling palm and closed her fingers around them. "Don't leave," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a raw plea. "Please, I don't trust anyone else." Isabella watched from the doorway, her face a mask of incandescent fury. She opened her mouth to scream, to curse, to threaten, but no sound came out. She had just been replaced. Not by a rival socialite or a corporate shark, but by the Maid. In one violent, desperate, and clarifying minute, the entire hierarchy of Julian Croft's world had been shattered and rebuilt, and Clara Reyes, against all logic, was now the one holding the keys to the kingdom. The hour that followed was a surreal, disjointed dream. Isabella's departure was not quiet. It was a hurricane of screamed threats and slammed doors, the sound of an expensive vase shattering in the foyer, a final petulant exclamation mark. Through it all, Julian remained in the study, slumped in his leather chair, staring at the stain on the marble as if it were a portal to another dimension. Clara stood by the door, the heavy keys digging into her palm, her mind unable to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. She was a maid. She had punched her billionaire boss. He had slapped his fiancée and given her, a virtual stranger, his most private possessions. None of it made sense. Finally, the silence returned, but this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of despair, but of exhaustion and uncertainty. "The stain won't come out," Julian said, his voice flat. "Hydrofluoric acid." It etches stone, glass too, efficient. Clara swallowed hard. Mr. Croft? Julian, he corrected without looking at her. I think you've earned the right. She took a tentative step into the room. Julian, are you all right? He let out a short, bitter laugh. All right? My life's work has been stolen by the man I called my brother. The woman I was going to marry was mentally calculating her financial losses as I was about to check out. And I was just assaulted by my housekeeper. No, Clara, I am very far from all right. He finally turned his head, his gaze meeting hers. The anger was gone, replaced by a profound weariness. But I'm alive. Thank you. The sincerity in his voice was disarming. I'm sorry I hit you, she stammered. I didn't know what else to do. You did the right thing, the only thing, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. Please, sit. Sitting felt like a transgression. It was his chair, his world. She was an employee, but his tone was not a request, it was a plea. She perched on the edge of the plush leather seat, her simple black uniform feeling absurdly out of place. Why? He asked, his voice low. Why did you do it? You could have lost your job. I could have had you arrested. Clara thought of her mother, of the quiet strength in her tired eyes. She thought of the promise she'd made to herself after her father's death, to never stand by and watch someone give up. My father, she began, her voice quiet but steady. He lost his business when I was young. A hardware store. It was his whole life. He fell into a dark place. He didn't have anyone to pull him out. I saw that same look in your eyes tonight. The look of someone who believes all the doors have closed. Julian listened, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he seemed to see her not as part of the furniture, but as a person with a history, with scars of her own. Marcus Thorne was my father's protégé, Julian explained, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. My father took him in when he was nothing, taught him everything. When my father passed, I made Marcus a full partner. I trusted him with everything. The company. My finances. My life. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. He's been siphoning money for years. Creating a shadow company with the stolen funds, he used that capital to short my own stock, driving the price down. And today, he initiated a hostile takeover bid, using my own embezzled money to buy my company out from under me. He used a deepfake algorithm to replicate my voice and a forged digital signature to authorize the final leverage. It's brilliant, in a demonic sort of way. By the time my lawyers untangle it, he'll have sold the company for parts and vanished. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. It wasn't just business. It was a violation of family, of trust, of history. And Isabella? Clara asked softly. Julian's jaw tightened. She introduced me to the broker who managed the offshore accounts Marcus used. She pushed me to sign the power of attorney that gave him access. All this time, I thought she was helping me, supporting me. He looked up, his eyes filled with a fresh wave of pain. They were in it together. Of course they were. Her cut was probably a hefty percentage of the spoils. It all clicked into place. Isabella hadn't been watching her inheritance die. She had been watching her co-conspirator's victim, ensuring he went through with the final act so there would be no one left to contest the theft. Her shock wasn't that he was trying to end his life, but that Clara had interfered with the plan. What about the board meeting tomorrow? Clara asked, her accounting student brain kicking in despite the insanity of the situation. There has to be something you can do, evidence you can present. My evidence is locked away behind layers of digital firewalls he created, Julian said, defeated. My access has been revoked. The servers are his. The financial records have been doctored. The only undoctored copies are on a hard drive in my office safe, but Marcus has already had the security codes changed. Physically, I'm locked out. Digitally, I'm a ghost. He's thought of everything. Clara looked down at the keys in her hand. The key to the executive garage, the master key to the penthouse, the small, unassuming brass key for the safe in his study. Julian followed her gaze, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He had given them to her on pure instinct, a desperate act of trust. He hadn't even realized the power he had just placed in her hands. He may have locked you out of the office, Clara said, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. But he hasn't locked you out of here. She held up the small brass key. Is there a terminal here, one that connects to the main company network? Julian stared at her, then a slow, incredulous smile touched his lips. It was the first real smile she had ever seen from him. In the wall, behind the portrait of my grandfather, he said, a spark of his old fire returning to his eyes. A direct, hard-wired mainframe link. A failsafe. I never thought I'd need to use it. He stood up, his movements more purposeful now. He walked to the grand portrait and slid it aside, revealing a biometric panel. He pressed his thumb against it, and a section of the wall slid open with a quiet hiss, revealing a recessed computer terminal and a sleek black safe. Marcus knows about this terminal, Julian said, his voice grim. But he thinks only my biometrics can open the safe where the hard drive is. He doesn't know. He trailed off, looking at Clara. He doesn't know that I still believe in old-fashioned analog backups. He took a step back, gesturing for her to approach the safe. He changed the electronic code, but he doesn't know about the manual override. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. A few hours ago, she was worrying about which polish to use on the mahogany. Now she was at the center of a billion-dollar corporate espionage plot. She looked from the safe to Julian's face, seeing a man pulled back from the brink, a flicker of hope warring with years of cynical distrust. He had trusted her, a gut instinct, a desperate gamble. She wouldn't let him down. She walked to the safe, the small brass key feeling impossibly heavy. This was no longer about saving a man's life, this was about helping him get it back. She inserted the key into the hidden lock, the tumblers clicking into place with a sound that seemed to echo with the weight of destiny. The fate of Croft Enterprises and the future of the two people in this room rested on what they would find inside. The click of the safe's lock was a gunshot in the quiet room. Clara turned the handle and the heavy steel door swung open, revealing not stacks of cash or jewels, but a single external hard drive. It was small, black and unassuming, yet it held the power to either save or permanently shatter Julian Croft's empire. Julian reached for it, his hand hesitating for a moment before closing around the device. The original sin, he murmured, plugging it into the hidden terminal. The complete, unredacted financials from the last 5 years. Everything Marcus thought he'd scrubbed from the main servers. The terminal hummed to life, its screen casting a blue glow on their anxious faces. Julian's fingers flew across the keyboard, his old confidence returning in a flood. Code scrolled across the screen, firewalls and encryptions appearing like digital ghosts. For hours they worked, Julian navigating the complex architecture of his own system, and Clara, with her sharp, methodical mind, poring over the spreadsheets and transaction logs that appeared. What she lacked in high-level corporate experience, she made up for with an accountant's eye for detail. She saw the patterns Julian, in his grief and rage, had missed. There, she said, pointing to a line item on the screen. It was 2 a.m., and the city outside was a tapestry of sleeping lights. This shell corporation, Vance Imports, it was established 2 years ago. The same week Ms. Vance signed her prenuptial agreement with you. Julian zoomed in, his expression hardening. I thought it was one of her fashion ventures. She said it was for importing Italian silks. The payments aren't going to Italy, Clara said, her finger tracing the transaction path. They're being routed through 3 different offshore accounts, all in the Cayman Islands, and then deposited into a holding company. Thorne Consolidated. Marcus, Julian breathed, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She wasn't just his accomplice, she was his delivery system. She used her position, my trust in her, to create the very pipeline he used to bleed me dry. They kept digging. Clara, fueled by coffee and a fierce, protective determination, became his second set of eyes. She cross-referenced dates, flagged suspicious wire transfers, and pieced together a timeline of the betrayal. It was more insidious than Julian had ever imagined. Marcus hadn't just stolen money, he had strategically sabotaged key projects, leaked proprietary information to rivals, and manipulated stock prices, all to weaken the company for this final killing blow. Isabella, meanwhile, had been his eyes and ears inside Julian's personal life, reporting on his moods, his plans, his moments of weakness. As dawn threatened to break, they had it. A complete, undeniable dossier of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy, all tied directly to Marcus Thorne and Isabella Vance. It was a digital bomb ready to be detonated. "The board meeting is at 9 a.m., Julian said, his voice raspy with exhaustion but thrumming with a new energy. He looked at Clara, his eyes full of an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was more than gratitude. It was respect. Awe, even. He'll be walking into his own coronation. He'll have no idea what's about to hit him. He printed a summary of their findings, the pages warm from the laser printer. "This is our only shot. I'll need to present this myself, but Marcus will have security waiting for me. He'll try to have me removed before I can even open my mouth." "Then you can't go in through the front door," Clara said, thinking aloud. "The keys." He had given her the keys. "The executive garage. Your private elevator goes directly to the boardroom antechamber, doesn't it?" Julian stared at her. "Yes, but he'll have changed the access codes." "He changed the electronic codes," Clara corrected gently, holding up the keyring. "But this is the manual override for the elevator, an analog key for a digital world." A slow smile spread across Julian's face. "You, Clara Reyes, are a secret weapon." He paused, his expression turning serious. "I need you with me, in that room. I trust your instincts more than I trust my own right now." The idea was terrifying. Her in a boardroom with the most powerful people in the city. She was wearing a maid's uniform that smelled faintly of lemon polish. "I can't," she whispered. I'm nobody." "You are the person who saved my company," he said, his voice firm. "You're the person who saved my life. That makes you the most important person in that room. Go home, get some sleep. I'll have a car pick you up at 8. Wear something formidable." He handed her a black credit card from his wallet. The Centurion card. Its purchasing power was virtually unlimited. "Buy whatever you need." Clara drove home in a daze, the pre-dawn light turning the sky from black to bruised purple. Her small apartment felt like a different universe from the opulent prison she had just left. She checked on her mother, who was sleeping peacefully. The rhythm of her breathing, a comfort to Clara's frayed nerves. Looking at her mother's face, Clara knew she couldn't back down. This wasn't just about Julian Croft's billions. It was about fighting for the person who took a chance on her, about standing up to the bullies and the cheats of the world. It was about proving that she was more than a maid, more than just a victim of circumstance. At 7 a.m., after only an hour of sleep, she walked into a high-end designer boutique just as it opened. The saleswoman looked her up and down, her polite smile barely concealing her disdain for Clara's simple clothes. "May I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting Clara was lost. Clara placed the black card on the glass counter. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I need something formidable." The saleswoman's eyes widened at the sight of the card. Her entire demeanor changed. Suddenly nothing was too much trouble. An hour later, Clara walked out, transformed. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, its sharp lines giving her a sense of armor. Her hair was pulled back in a severe professional bun, and she wore simple, elegant heels. She was no longer Clara the maid. She was Clara Reyes, and she was going to war. The lobby of Croft Enterprises Tower was a cathedral of glass and steel, designed to intimidate. Men and women in expensive suits moved with predatory grace, their faces set with the grim determination of those who trade in fortunes. As Clara stepped out of the Blacktown car Julian had sent, she felt 100 pairs of eyes on her. Whispers followed her like a shadow. They didn't know who she was, but she carried herself with an authority that demanded attention, an authority forged in the crucible of the last 12 hours. She met Julian by the private entrance to the executive garage. He looked transformed as well. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, and the haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a cold, hard fire. He looked like a king ready to reclaim his throne. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. She gave a single firm nod. "Ready." They bypassed the main security, Julian's analog key granting them access to the private elevator. As they ascended in the silent, wood-paneled car, the tension was thick enough to taste. "They're going to try and discredit you," Julian warned. "They'll call you a liar, a gold digger. They'll use your job against you, Let them, Clara said, her gaze steady. The truth doesn't care what uniform you're wearing. The elevator doors opened not into the boardroom itself, but into a small private antechamber. Through a pane of one-way glass, they could see the board members assembling around the long mahogany table. Marcus Thorne was at the head of the table, in the seat that had always been Julian's. He was laughing, accepting congratulations from the other members. Isabella was there too, seated just to his right, a picture of poised elegance. A faint bruise was visible on her cheek, expertly covered with concealer, a subtle badge of her supposed victimhood. "Showtime," Julian muttered. He took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The laughter in the boardroom died instantly. Every head turned. A collective gasp went through the room as Julian Croft, the man they believed to be broken and defeated, strode in. Marcus's smile froze on his face, his eyes widening in shock, then narrowing in fury. "Julian," Marcus said, recovering quickly, his voice smooth as oil. "We weren't expecting you. I'm afraid this is a closed meeting." "My name is still on the building, Marcus," Julian said, his voice calm and carrying to every corner of the room. "I believe that gives me the right to attend." He placed a thin file on the table. "And I have some information that I believe the board will find illuminating." "Security," Marcus barked, pressing a button on the console in front of him. "Remove this man. He is clearly unwell and is trespassing." Two large security guards entered the room, moving towards Julian. "Before you have me thrown out," Julian said, raising his voice slightly, "you should all know that Mr. Thorne, your new prospective CEO, has systematically embezzled over $200 million from this company over the past 5 years. The room erupted in murmurs. Marcus paled slightly. These are the desperate, delusional ramblings of a broken man. He has no proof. "That's where you're wrong," Julian said, turning to the door. "My proof is right here." He opened the door and Clara stepped through. If Julian's entrance had caused a stir, Clara's was a bombshell. Isabella shot to her feet, her face a mask of pure hatred. "What is she doing here? This is the maid. She assaulted Julian last night. He has a concussion. She's been manipulating him, feeding him lies." The board members stared, confused. An elderly woman on the board, Elizabeth Vance, a distant, disapproving aunt of Isabella's, looked at her niece with contempt. "Isabella, sit down. You're making a scene." "She's not just a maid," Julian announced, his voice ringing with authority. "She's the forensic accountant who uncovered the largest fraud in this company's history." He gestured to the large screen at the end of the room. "If you'll direct your attention to the screen." He pressed a key on his tablet, and the screen lit up with the first page of their findings, a detailed flowchart showing the creation of Vance Imports and its direct financial link to Thorne Consolidated. Clara stepped forward, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "Good morning, my name is Clara Reyes. For the past 12 hours, Mr. Croft and I have been conducting a full audit of the company's unredacted financial records." For the next 30 minutes, she spoke. She didn't use jargon or complicated financial terms. She laid out the story of the betrayal in plain, simple, undeniable language. She walked them through the doctored invoices, the ghost employees, the offshore accounts. With every slide, every piece of evidence, the blood drained from Marcus Thorne's face. He tried to interrupt, to object, but Elizabeth Vance silenced him with a glacial stare. "You will have your turn to speak, Marcus. For now, let us hear what Ms. Reyes has to say." Clara presented the emails between Marcus and Isabella, discussing how to manage Julian's erratic behavior and the best time to push for him to sign key documents. She showed them the final damning piece of evidence. A security log showing Marcus accessing the servers from his home computer at 3 a.m. to plant the deepfake voice authorization, time-stamped and geolocated. When she finished, there was a dead silence in the room. Every eye was on Marcus and Isabella, who sat frozen, exposed and defeated. Marcus, however, was not one to fold so easily. His arrogance was a shield. He stood, forcing a condescending laugh. This is an outrage," he boomed, his voice regaining its confidence. "This is a pathetic fantasy, a fiction created by a madman on the verge of a breakdown and his servant." He gestured dismissively at Clara. Are we really to believe that this woman, a college dropout who cleans his toilets, managed to unravel a financial conspiracy that our entire team of high-paid analysts missed? It's absurd. She's a gold digger who saw an opportunity to manipulate a vulnerable man. Look at her, dressed in a suit Julian obviously bought for her this morning. This isn't evidence, it's a circus. Isabella joined in, dabbing a crocodile tear from her eye. He's not himself. She's twisted his grief. He attacked me last night, and now he's letting this nobody ruin his life's work out of spite. The board began to murmur, the seeds of doubt taking root. Marcus pressed his advantage. I demand a full investigation into her, into this entire pathetic charade. Julian remained perfectly calm. He let the accusations hang in the air, letting Marcus's arrogance fill the room. Then he spoke, his voice cutting through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. You are right about one thing, Marcus. It is difficult to believe the word of one person against another, especially when one is my housekeeper. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the board. Which is why I have brought another witness. Someone whose loyalty to this company and to my family is beyond question. He looked toward a discreet service door at the back of the boardroom. The door opened, and Arthur Pembleton, Julian's butler for over 30 years, a man so discreet he was practically invisible, stepped forward. He held a small, sleek audio recorder. Arthur has served the Croft family since before I was born, Julian said. He is, perhaps, the most honourable man I have ever known. Marcus scoffed. The butler? This is your grand witness? What's he going to do? Testify that I used the wrong fork for the fish course? Arthur ignored him, his gaze fixed on the board members. His voice was quiet, precise, and carried the weight of decades of silent observation. Forgive the intrusion, ladies and gentlemen, he began. For the past 6 months, I have observed Mr. Thorne and Miss Vance. I have noted their frequent private meetings in the West Wing Library, a room Mr. Croft rarely uses. I have noted the hushed, urgent phone calls. And I have noted the way they looked at each other when they believed no one was watching. He paused, his gaze finally landing on Marcus. Last week, I was in the service pantry adjacent to the study, polishing silver. I overheard a conversation. Fearing for Mr. Croft's well-being, I took the liberty of recording it. He pressed play. Isabella's voice filled the room, clear and chillingly intimate. He's getting suspicious, Marcus. We need to accelerate the timeline. The final transfer has to happen before the quarterly review. The sound of a glass being set down, then Marcus's voice, smug and triumphant. Don't worry, my love. By the time the board meets next week, Julian will be a tragic headline and we'll be in control of everything. Just keep him drinking, keep him depressed. His despair is our greatest asset. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute and condemning. It was a silence heavier than any Clara had ever felt in the penthouse. It was the silence of guilt, of public execution. Isabella let out a small, strangled sob. Marcus Thorne simply sank into his chair, his face the colour of ash, his arrogance finally shattered. Elizabeth Vance was the first to speak, her voice dripping with ice. Marcus, Isabella, I suggest you wait for the authorities in the lobby. I took the liberty of calling them the moment Ms. Reyes presented the wire transfers. She then turned her sharp, intelligent gaze to Clara. Ms. Reyes, that was the most brilliant and courageous presentation I have ever witnessed in this boardroom. The other board members nodded in agreement, their expressions a mixture of shock and admiration. They looked at Clara not as a maid, but as the company's saviour. Julian walked over to Clara, a look of profound, overwhelming gratitude on his face. In front of everyone, he put a hand on her shoulder. The company owes you a debt it can never repay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I owe you a debt I can never repay. The 2 security guards, who had been standing awkwardly by the door, now moved with purpose. But they walked past Julian. They walked straight to Marcus and Isabella, flanking them. Sir, ma'am, one of them said, his voice polite but firm, if you'll come with us. As they were escorted out, defeated and disgraced, Clara met Julian's eyes across the boardroom table. The battle was over. The kingdom was safe, but for both of them, a new, uncertain, and infinitely more complicated chapter was just beginning. In the weeks that followed, the story of the billionaire and the maid became corporate legend. Marcus Thorne and Isabella Vance were denied bail, their legal battle a public spectacle of greed and betrayal. Croft Enterprises, stabilized and invigorated, saw its stock price soar. Julian had refused to let Clara return to her old duties. 2 days after the board meeting, he had called her to his office. She walked in, still feeling out of place, to find him looking not at spreadsheets, but at her university transcripts, which he must have gotten from her employee file. "You were 2 semesters away from graduating with honors," he said, his voice quiet. "Top of your class in forensic accounting." "My mother got sick," she said simply. "I know," he closed the file. "I'm creating a new division, effective immediately. Internal auditing and risk assessment. It will be independent of all other departments and will answer directly to the CEO. I want you to run it." Clara was stunned into silence. "Me? I'm not qualified. I don't even have a degree." "You have a mind sharper than anyone I've ever met with 3 degrees, he countered, his gaze intense. "You have something they don't teach in business school, integrity that can't be bought and courage that can't be broken. I can teach you corporate procedure. You've already taught me what's truly important. The position is yours, Clara, if you'll take it." So she accepted. The transition was jarring. She traded her uniform for a wardrobe of formidable suits. The staff who had once given her orders now called her Ms. Reyes and deferred to her judgment. Julian became her mentor, and their late-night work sessions became a fixture. They would pore over contracts and market analyses, the city lights a silent witness to their growing partnership. The dynamic between them was a delicate dance of professionalism and the unspoken bond they shared. He never crossed a line, but the way he looked at her, with a respect that bordered on reverence, spoke volumes. One evening, about a month after the takeover attempt, she was working late in her new corner office when Julian knocked softly on the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Burning the midnight oil, Ms. Reyes?" he asked, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "Just finishing the quarterly risk assessment, Mr. Croft," she replied, the old title's a comfortable habit. He handed her a cup and sat in the chair opposite her desk. "I received a letter today," he said finally. "From my lawyers, the court has officially seized all of Isabella's assets. Among them was a safety deposit box. Inside," he paused, "was the engagement ring I gave her." He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on her desk. "Her lawyers claim it was a gift. Mine claim it was conditional. What do you think?" Clara looked at the box, at the immense wealth and painful memories it represented. "I think," she said carefully, "that it represents a past that almost destroyed you. It's tainted. It doesn't belong to her, but it shouldn't belong to you either." "My thoughts exactly," he said. "I'm selling it. And I'm using the money to start a foundation." He stood and walked to the window. "It will be called the Reyes Foundation. It will provide full scholarships and living stipends for promising finance students who had to drop out of college due to family hardship. It will give people a second chance. People like you." Clara was speechless, tears blurring the city lights into a glittering haze. "You don't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I do," he said, walking back to her desk. He stood before her, the space between them charged with unspoken emotion. "Clara, what you did for me. You didn't just save my company. You rebuilt my faith in people. You rebuilt me." He reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the desk. His touch was warm, electric. "This job, this foundation, it's not enough. It can never be repayment for a life." His voice dropped, becoming softer, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "I was hoping it could be a beginning." Clara's heart was hammering. She looked into his eyes and saw not a billionaire and his employee, but a man who saw her for exactly who she was. She had walked into his life to clean his house, but had ended up helping him clean up his entire world. And in doing so, she had built a new one for herself. She turned her hand over, her fingers lacing with his. "Julian," she said, her voice filled with a hope she hadn't felt in years. "I think it could be a beginning too." He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile, but before he could speak, Clara gently withdrew her hand. "But first," she said, her expression turning serious, "there's something you need to know. That night, it wasn't just a coincidence that I was there, and it wasn't just instinct." Julian's brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? I'd been watching them for 2 months, Clara confessed, her voice low but firm. Not as a maid, but as an accountant. It started with a misplaced invoice for Vance Imports. The tax code was wrong for a textile company. It was a small thing, a loose thread, but I couldn't let it go. In my spare time, I started digging into public records. I built a file. She swiveled in her chair, typing a password into her computer. A folder opened on the screen, filled with documents, charts, and timelines. I traced the shell company back to a P.O. box registered to one of Marcus's old college roommates. I found the property records for the offshore holding company. I knew something was deeply wrong, but I had no proof of their intent. I was just a maid with a conspiracy theory. Who would have listened to me? Julian stared at the screen, then back at her, his face a mask of astonishment. You knew. You knew they were stealing from me, long before I did. I knew something was happening, she corrected. But that night, when I heard you say Marcus had won, when I heard her ask about the venue deposit, and when I smelled the acid, I knew their endgame wasn't just to bankrupt you. It was to erase you. My intervention wasn't a desperate act, Julian. It was a calculated one. Punching you was the only variable I hadn't planned for. The awe in his eyes was palpable. He had seen her as a savior, an angel of mercy who had stumbled into his life at the right moment. The truth was far more staggering. She was a quiet, meticulous warrior who had been fighting a secret war on his behalf long before he even knew he was under attack. His gratitude transformed into something deeper, a profound respect for the sheer force of her will and intellect. The trial is in 6 months, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Their lawyers are the best money can buy. They'll try to tear our evidence apart. They'll say Arthur's recording was illegal, that my testimony is tainted by my emotional breakdown. I know, Clara said, her gaze turning to steel, and that's when I'll give my testimony. Not as your employee who happened to be there, but as the independent analyst who uncovered their entire conspiracy from the outside in, using nothing but publicly available data. We didn't just find Marcus's fingerprints on the murder weapon, Julian. I'm going to show the jury the detailed plans he drew up to build it. 6 months later, the courtroom was a media circus. Marcus Thorne, ever arrogant, entered in a tailored suit, a confident smirk playing on his lips. His lawyers had spent the preceding days masterfully chipping away at the prosecution's case. They had argued that Arthur's recording was an illegal wiretap. They had painted Julian as an unstable, jilted lover lashing out. Isabella, playing the part of a tragic victim, wept silently into a silk handkerchief. Marcus was confident. The maid's testimony would be the easiest to discredit. The prosecution calls Clara Reyes to the stand, the bailiff announced. Clara walked to the witness box, her steps measured and confident. She wore a simple, dark grey suit, her appearance professional and unassailable. Marcus leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something, a dismissive sneer on his face. The prosecution's questions were straightforward, establishing the events of that night. Then came the cross-examination. Marcus's lawyer, a silver-haired shark named Peterson, approached her with a predatory smile. Ms. Reyes, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You were, at the time, a housekeeper, correct? A college dropout cleaning Mr. Croft's penthouse. I was employed as a housekeeper, yes, Clara answered calmly. And you expect this jury to believe that you, with no formal training, uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud that eluded a team of professional auditors? My training is in forensic accounting, Clara stated, her voice unwavering, and I did not uncover the fraud from inside the company. I tracked it from the outside. Peterson laughed. From the outside. With what? A library card and a search engine? Precisely, Clara said, turning to the judge. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to present the findings of my independent investigation, which began 2 months prior to the events in question. The courtroom buzzed. Marcus's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. Over the next hour, Clara, with the aid of a large screen, laid out a case so airtight, so meticulously documented, it was suffocating. She presented incorporation documents from Delaware, tax filings from Nevada, shipping manifests that listed Italian silks but used codes for untraceable bearer bonds. She showed the jury how Vance Imports was a phantom, A ghost created for the sole purpose of laundering money to Thorne Consolidated. Every piece of evidence was from a public source, legally obtained and utterly damning. It wasn't a story of betrayal, it was an audit of a crime. The final slide showed a satellite image of a small barren island in the Caribbean. This island, Clara said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom, was purchased 3 months ago by Thorne Consolidated. It has no resources, no infrastructure. It does, however, have one important feature. It is a non-extradition territory. This was not just a theft, it was a meticulously planned escape. Marcus Thorne was staring at her, his face ashen. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind the raw, ugly face of a common thief. Isabella was no longer weeping. She was staring into space, her expression utterly blank, a porcelain doll that had been shattered. He hadn't been outmaneuvered by a billionaire's resources. He had been taken down by the quiet, relentless brilliance of the one person he had never even noticed. His ultimate downfall wasn't Julian's anger, it was his own hubris. The verdict was a foregone conclusion, guilty on all counts. As Marcus and Isabella were led away in handcuffs, their designer clothes looking like cheap costumes, Julian was waiting for Clara at the courthouse steps. The media swarmed them, but he guided her through the chaos, a protective arm around her. They stood for a moment, watching the prison transport van disappear into traffic. The silence that settled between them was a new kind. It was the silence of a shared victory, of a storm that had finally passed. "I don't think I ever truly thanked you," Julian said, turning to face her, "not for saving my company, or even for saving my life, but for seeing me. When I had become invisible to everyone, including myself, you saw me." "I saw a good man who had forgotten how to fight," she replied, a soft smile on her face. "I just reminded you." He reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles, the same knuckles that had once collided with his jaw. "The Reyes Foundation awarded its first 5 scholarships last week," he said. "And I've finished my degree," she added, her eyes sparkling. "I'm officially qualified to be the head of your internal auditing department." He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. "Clara Reyes, you are qualified to run the entire world. But I was hoping you'd settle for co-running mine." He paused, his expression turning serious, hopeful. "This is a new beginning for both of us. How would you like to start it?" "Over dinner." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. The power imbalance was gone, erased by mutual respect, and forged in the fires of betrayal and redemption. She was not the maid, and he was not just the billionaire. They were Julian and Clara. "I'd like that very much," she said. Together they walked away from the courthouse, leaving the wreckage of the past behind. The keys he had given her had unlocked a kingdom, but the courage she had shown him had unlocked a future. Like, share, and comment your thoughts on this ending.